I had just finished a long shift at the sheriff's office and was looking forward to the quiet comfort of my neighborhood. The kind of peace that comes from knowing your driveway is your own little slice of calm. I didn't expect that peace to explode into chaos the moment I pulled my car up to the curb. There she was, Karen, HOA Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our little community, and today she was armed with a shiny little key and a smug look like she owned the world. I slowed down, trying not to laugh as I watched her approach my car. Her eyes locked on my door handle like a hawk spotting prey. "Finally, someone who will let me enforce the rules," she muttered under her breath, or maybe to herself. Either way, I heard it. I leaned back in my seat, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really I was watching every dramatic, exaggerated movement she made. Karen stuck the key into my door. Jiggle, jiggle, click, nothing. The door remained firmly locked. She pulled harder, twisting and turning like the universe had personally offended her. At this point, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I let out a quiet chuckle. "Oh no," she whispered to herself, in that dramatic tone only HOA Karens can perfect. "This can't be happening. My master key, it's supposed to open any car." And then, like any dramatic villain, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. I froze, not out of fear, but for the sheer comedy of it all. The neighborhood gossip, the people who always peeked from behind curtains, would get a show today, and they weren't going to be disappointed. She pressed the phone to her ear and began narrating her version of events. "There's a man, I don't know him. He's trying to open my car," she exclaimed in a voice loud enough for half the street to hear. I sat there silently, letting her paint me as the criminal in her story. Minutes later, I heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance. My smile widened. She had no idea who she was messing with. I stepped out of the car slowly, hands raised, not in surrender but in mock compliance. Karen flinched like I was a wild animal. "He's coming toward me," she shrieked into the phone. "I don't know what he's going to do." I took one calm, measured step closer, then another. The sun was setting, casting golden streaks across the street. It should have been peaceful, but instead, it felt like the opening scene of a high-stakes drama. My own driveway had transformed into a stage, and Karen was performing a one-woman meltdown for all to see. Then came the flashing lights. 2 patrol cars turned the corner, speeding toward us. I sighed inwardly, perfect timing. Just as I had hoped, the officers jumped out, hands hovering near their belts, scanning the scene. Karen pointed frantically at me, still clutching her phone. "He's trying to break into my car, do something." The officers paused, exchanging puzzled glances. One squinted at me, probably wondering why I wasn't cuffed or running. I leaned casually against my car, giving them a small, friendly wave. And that's when it hit me, the beauty of the situation. Every step I had taken today, every ounce of patience I had practiced, was about to pay off. Karen had dialed 911, called the cops, and was acting like the hero of the neighborhood, all while I was, well, me. A sheriff, her sheriff, and she didn't know it. I took a deep breath, letting the tension build. Karen's eyes widened, darting between me and the flashing lights. You could almost hear her mind screaming, "This isn't how it's supposed to happen." And that's when I smiled. Because in that moment, I knew the real drama, the one that would leave the whole neighborhood talking, was about to begin. Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her HOA life, and the best part, she didn't even realize the show had started yet. The officers finally stepped out of their patrol cars, eyes scanning the scene like they were entering a war zone. One officer, younger, maybe fresh out of the academy, glanced at me with a mix of confusion and hesitation. The other, older, more seasoned, raised an eyebrow like he'd seen too many neighborhood disputes to be shocked by anything. Karen, meanwhile, was practically vibrating with panic. Her phone still clutched in her hand, she waved it at the officers like it was a lifeline. "He's trying to break into my car," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Do something, please." I leaned casually against my car, arms crossed, giving her the perfect picture of innocence or arrogance. Take your pick. I could almost hear the mental gears turning in her head. Why isn't he running? Why isn't he scared? This can't be happening. One officer stepped forward, trying to get a handle on the situation. "Sir," "Ma'am, can someone explain what's going on here?" Karen's eyes darted between me and the officers, panic in full swing. He was trying to open my car. I don't know him. I think he's dangerous," she exclaimed, her words tripping over each other. Her frantic stammering only made the scene more dramatic. I couldn't help but stifle a laugh behind my hand. Honestly, I wanted to clap. She was performing like she was auditioning for a reality show, and the whole neighborhood, well, it looked like they were already tuning in. The younger officer glanced at me again, suspicion still lingering. "Sir, did you try to, access her vehicle?" I shook my head slowly, letting my badge dangle visibly from my belt. "Nope, no attempts, just me enjoying the sunset." Karen's mouth fell open. Her phone slipped slightly in her grip as her eyes locked on the badge. "Wait, what?" "Yes," I said calmly, leaning on the hood of my car like it was a stage prop. "I am the sheriff, that's right. Your HOA suspect is me, and this." I gestured around. "This is my driveway, my car, my evening, and you just called 911 on your sheriff." Time seemed to freeze. You could almost hear the collective gasp of the neighborhood, even through the tension of the moment. I caught a neighbor peeking through their blinds, smirking, probably recording everything. This was going to be viral before any TikTok trends caught on. Karen's face went from panic to disbelief to sheer horror in the span of 3 seconds. "I didn't know," she stammered, waving her hands as if trying to erase reality itself. I thought." "The thought doesn't matter," I said, my voice calm but firm, letting every word land like a hammer. "What matters is that you misused 911, trespassed in a public area, and now, thanks to your overconfidence with a little piece of metal, you've embarrassed yourself in front of the entire neighborhood." The younger officer looked like he was about to laugh but tried to remain professional. "Ma'am, you realize calling 911 falsely is, illegal, right?" Karen's eyes widened, but she tried to retort. "But I thought it was an emergency." I shook my head slowly, letting a small, knowing smile creep across my face. "Emergency? Sure. If someone is trying to unlock your HOA-issued imaginary master key, that's definitely an emergency. But apparently the real emergency is your judgment." At this point, Karen's hands were trembling so badly, she nearly dropped the phone. I could see her plotting, panicking, and pretending like she could somehow rewrite the script that had gone terribly wrong. I took a step closer, soft enough to be non-threatening but firm enough to assert authority. "Listen, Karen, let's make this simple. Take a deep breath, apologize, and maybe, just maybe, you'll survive this encounter with your pride mostly intact." Karen's lips quivered. Her eyes darted to the patrol officers, silently pleading for backup. They just shook their heads, clearly enjoying the show. And then she did it, the ultimate HOA Karen-esque move. She muttered something under her breath, clearly thinking no one heard. But I did, and I knew the neighbors did too. That tiny whisper, it set up the next act. And if she thought this would end quietly, well, she was about to find out the neighborhood and her sheriff were in full dramatic mode tonight. Karen's whisper had barely left her lips before I realized exactly what she was attempting. That little mutter, that desperate flinch, was classic HOA panic behavior. The kind that usually ends with someone storming off, filing a complaint, or in extreme cases, trying one last heroic stunt to save face. I could feel the neighborhood watching. Windows cracked open, a few heads peeking through blinds, and I swear, someone in the distance even aimed their phone like they were filming a movie trailer. The absurdity of it all, perfect. Karen straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and tried to march toward my car as if she had some authority over it. I raised a single eyebrow. "Let me guess, you're going to try that master key one more time?" I asked, voice calm, but with the tiniest hint of sarcasm. Her jaw dropped. How do you know?" she stammered, but her words trailed off. She had no good answer because I was reading her like an open HOA handbook. Every step she took screamed desperation, and honestly, it was almost heroic in a tragic, self-inflicted sort of way. The two officers had finally settled into their roles, one leaning against his patrol car trying not to laugh, the other standing with arms crossed, smirking in that "I've seen it all" kind of way. Karen's face twisted into what could only be described as horror comedy. "This can't be happening," she whispered to herself. I took a slow step forward, the kind that says, "I'm calm, but I'm in charge," and I allowed my voice to carry across the street. "Karen, let's stop pretending this is about a car. We both know what's really happening here. You've just realized you messed with the wrong person." She froze mid-step, eyes wide, mouth open, trying to conjure a retort but failing spectacularly. I could see the gears turning in her mind, probably running through a list of HOA rules that she thought would save her, none of which mattered at that moment. Then she made the mistake, the classic irreversible Karen mistake. She pointed her finger at me and said, "Well, you shouldn't be standing there like that. I have rights too." I let out a quiet, amused chuckle. "Rights? Karen, you just called 911 on the sheriff in his own driveway. That's not a right. That's a plot twist waiting for an audience." The younger officer snickered. The older officer didn't even try to hide a grin. And Karen was shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. She looked like she was going to explode, but also like she was auditioning for a tragic comedy. And then she did it. She lunged toward her car again, clutching the master key like it was Excalibur, muttering something about neighborhood safety and responsibilities. I raised a hand, not in aggression, just in polite warning. "Karen, let's pause for a moment." She froze, one foot hovering in midair, eyes darting between me and the two officers. Sweat gleamed on her forehead, her knuckles white around the key. The tension was so thick, I could practically cut it with a butter knife. "You know," I said slowly, letting each word land like a drumbeat in a suspense film, "there's an easier way to handle this. You can apologize, you can admit a mistake. Or you can continue pretending your master key is magical and risk-looking, well, exactly like you do right now." Her lips trembled. The phone slipped slightly from her grip. She swallowed hard, like the neighborhood itself had turned into an audience ready to judge. And in that split second, I knew she was about to make a move that would either save her dignity or annihilate it. "Please, just let me," she began, her voice almost pleading now, but stopped abruptly. She realized, maybe too late, that pleading wouldn't change the fact that she had already called 911 on her sheriff. The audience, our little street of spectators, shifted nervously. Some were stifling laughter. Some were holding their breath. And Karen, well, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, trying to reconcile fantasy with reality. And that's when I smiled. Not a mean smile, not a victory smile. A smile that said, the stage is set, the players are in place, and the next act, oh, the next act is going to be unforgettable. Karen froze mid-step, her hand clutching the master key like it was a lifeline. Her eyes were darting everywhere, my face, the officers, even the sky, as if the universe might intervene and undo her mistake. The tension was so thick you could slice it with a knife. I could hear my own heartbeat in the quiet that had suddenly descended over the street. Then I took a slow, deliberate step forward. Calm, unhurried, letting the suspense build. I reached for my belt and pulled out my sheriff badge, letting the sunlight glint off the metal. I held it high like a prize, like a mic drop. "Yes," I said, letting my voice carry across the street, every syllable slow and deliberate. "I am the sheriff. This is my badge. And Karen, you just called 911 on me in my own driveway." The neighborhood collectively gasped. Windows flew open. Phones were pointed at the scene like paparazzi. And Karen's face went through an entire emotional spectrum in about 3 seconds. Disbelief, horror, panic, then a faint glimmer of hope that maybe, somehow, this was a bad dream. "I didn't know," she stammered, her knees almost buckling. The master key slipped from her hand, clattering onto the pavement. It sounded like the dramatic drum roll of her own humiliation. One officer tried to maintain professional composure, but even he was smirking behind his hand. The other, well, I swear he was ready to pull out popcorn. "Didn't know," I echoed slowly, raising an eyebrow. "Karen, you called 911 on your sheriff. Your master key failed. And now you're standing in front of your entire street, looking like you just lost the HOA Olympics." Karen's lips quivered. She tried to gather her composure, straightening her shoulders, but it was hopeless. Her dramatic little march toward the car had vanished. All that was left was a small, flustered woman realizing that her neighborhood reign had just met reality. You can't do that," she finally squeaked, pointing at me like she could somehow revoke my authority with sheer willpower. "Oh, I can," I said, calmly leaning against my car again. "And I just did. Let me explain something important about calling 911. It's not for testing your master key on other people's property. It's for real emergencies. And yes, apparently calling on your sheriff counts as not an emergency." Her face turned red, purple, then a mix of colors I didn't know existed. It was almost beautiful in a chaotic, cinematic way. I could feel the tension in the air, even the birds seemed to pause mid-flight. Karen attempted a shaky retort, but I was just enforcing rules. I shook my head slowly. Enforcing rules doesn't mean breaking the law, Karen, and it certainly doesn't mean embarrassing yourself in front of the whole neighborhood. Look around, people are watching. Phones are recording. You're about to become a cautionary tale. Her shoulders slumped. She looked like a cartoon character whose balloon had just popped. The officers exchanged glances, stifling laughter, clearly trying not to intervene because the drama was already perfect. And then she tried her last-ditch maneuver, the HOA Victim Act. She flailed her hands, wailing, "I'm just a concerned citizen. I didn't mean." I raised a hand, smiling, letting her words die in the air. "Karen, you're officially done for today, and just so you know, your master key? Useless. You can't unlock someone's driveway, their car, or their dignity if you try. You just learned that lesson the hard way." I could see her trembling, realizing that not only had she misjudged me, but the entire neighborhood had witnessed it. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the embarrassment settle like fine dust in the evening sun. Then, as if on cue, a neighbor across the street laughed quietly, followed by a few more. Phones lifted higher. The street was alive with hushed giggles, whispers, and the faint sound of someone muttering, "Wow, she called the sheriff." Karen's jaw dropped, her eyes glassy. That was the moment I knew she finally understood. Her kingdom of HOA superiority had collapsed in a single dramatic scene, and I, her sheriff, had delivered the verdict. I stepped back, giving her space to retreat, the badge still gleaming in my hand. "Take a deep breath," I said softly. "And maybe, just maybe, consider what's really important, knowing the law before pretending to enforce it." Karen froze, defeated, her master key lying forgotten on the pavement. And as the neighborhood absorbed every second of this spectacle, I couldn't help but smile. Justice, after all, doesn't always come quietly. Sometimes it comes with drama, suspense, and a little bit of humor. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish. Her eyes were wild, searching for some sort of lifeline, some escape from the embarrassment of calling 911 on her own sheriff. But there wasn't one. Not in that driveway, not in front of the entire neighborhood. Then it happened. The classic HOA Karen-esque move. She fumbled in her oversized purse and pulled out paperwork, flyers, complaints, a full-blown HOA violation packet. Her lips quivered as she muttered, "I'm going to report you to the HOA. This isn't over." I raised an eyebrow. "You're going to report me to the HOA?" I let the words linger in the air like smoke. "Karen, you just called 911 on the sheriff, and now you think the HOA will take your side." Her hands shook as she waved the paperwork like it was a magic wand. "They will. They have rules. I have evidence. I am a responsible HOA member." I stifled a laugh, trying not to break the dramatic tension. "Rules, Karen? Let's think this through. You trespassed on private property, misused emergency services, and publicly humiliated yourself. And you think filing a complaint is going to fix any of that?" Her eyes narrowed. She flinched slightly, but I could see the gears turning in her brain. She was calculating her next move, probably imagining an HOA tribunal where she could somehow turn the tables. She didn't know, of course, that I was more than just her average neighbor. I had authority, experience, and patience in equal measure. The younger officer tilted his head, trying to hide a smirk. The older one shook his head slowly, muttering something about HOA drama being the weirdest thing they'd ever witnessed. Karen, meanwhile, had decided that her only option was escalation. She began rattling off rules, bylaws, and supposed violations. Every word was punctuated with desperation, as if sheer volume could convince reality to bend in her favor. "Karen," I said, calm but firm, "you are forgetting one crucial detail. I am the sheriff. I enforce the law, yes, but I also enforce sanity. And right now your behavior is, well, a violation of common sense and possibly the HOA ethics code." Her jaw dropped, her eyes widened. The crowd of neighbors that had gathered, some leaning out of windows, some peeking from behind hedges, started murmuring. Phones were raised, capturing every word, every dramatic gesture. The street had transformed into a stage, and Karen was the unwitting star of her own tragicomic performance. She tried again, louder this time. "I have witnesses. They saw him trying to—" "Witnesses of what?" I interrupted gently, letting a pause stretch just long enough to amplify the drama. "Of you holding a master key like it's a weapon. Of you panicking, dialing 911 on the wrong person. Or of you attempting to assert imaginary authority." Her hands trembled, and I could see her confidence evaporating with each word. Even the officers, who had seen countless domestic disputes and minor crimes, were visibly trying not to laugh. The tension was tangible, but the humor, oh, it was there, delicious, dry, and completely undeniable. Karen, realizing the audience was against her, made a last-ditch attempt at moral high ground. "I'm just enforcing the rules. Someone has to maintain order in this neighborhood." I let out a soft, sardonic chuckle. "Karen, order isn't calling 911 on the sheriff. Order isn't threatening neighbors with a master key. And order definitely isn't pretending the HOA gives you superpowers." Her face went pale. The realization finally dawned on her. Not only had she failed spectacularly, she had done so in front of everyone, with evidence captured on multiple phones. She slowly sank to the curb, the paperwork fluttering to the ground, a defeated queen in a crumbling kingdom of her own making. And just when I thought the scene couldn't get any better, one neighbor called out from across the street, "Hey, Karen, maybe next time just use the doorbell." Laughter erupted, soft at first, then louder, echoing across the neighborhood. Karen's shoulders shook, not with pride, but with the slow realization that her HOA reign had ended in disaster. I leaned back against my car, keeping my badge visible, letting the moment settle. Karen had learned the hard way that authority has limits, and sometimes the real power lies not in a master key or rules, but in knowing the law and who enforces it. Just when I thought Karen had hit rock bottom, she proved that some people have an endless capacity for dramatic overreaction. Her shoulders hunched as if preparing for battle, her eyes darting around for any loophole, any imaginary rule she could exploit. I could almost hear her thinking, if I can't win with the master key, I'll win with paperwork, or shouting, or sheer panic. She stormed over to the curb, grabbing the scattered HOA papers in a flurry of desperation. Her movements were frantic, almost cartoonish. The neighborhood had gone silent, everyone sensing that the climax of this saga was imminent. Even the officers, who had tried to remain composed, were watching intently, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "I will not be humiliated like this," Karen shouted, waving the papers like a flag of rebellion. "I will report you to the HOA, to the county, to—" I raised a hand, calmly interrupting her tirade. "Karen, I think you're overestimating your influence. You see, I enforce the law, not the HOA bylaws you so desperately cling to." Her face twisted with disbelief. "But I rules community order," she sputtered, her voice rising in pitch with every word. She was like a storm contained in human form, and the neighborhood was caught in the eye. "Community order?" I asked, letting a smirk play across my lips. "Karen, calling 911 on your sheriff, threatening a neighbor's car with a master key, and filing pointless HOA complaints. That's not order. That's chaos with a side of delusion." The officers couldn't hold it in any longer. One of them covered his mouth, trying not to laugh, and the other shook his head, muttering, "This is the weirdest HOA call I've ever taken." Karen, undeterred by the audience, attempted her final, desperate act. She stomped toward the HOA bulletin board at the edge of the neighborhood, clutching her paperwork like a weapon. "I will post my complaint. Everyone will see. Everyone will know you tried to." I walked toward her slowly, calmly, keeping my badge visible. Each step was deliberate, each word measured. Karen, step back. Consider what you're about to do. Every person watching, every phone recording this moment, they're seeing you escalate from nuisance to full-blown neighborhood spectacle. Her face flushed. She paused, glancing around nervously, clearly sensing that the street had turned against her. Neighbors were whispering, phones were raised, and I swear I could hear a dog barking in agreement. The officers exchanged a knowing glance, silently communicating. Yeah, she's officially lost it. Karen tried one last ploy. I'm just trying to protect the neighborhood, she yelled, shaking the papers. I have rights, I have rules, I let her words hang in the air. Then I smiled, calm and authoritative, letting the tension stretch like a drawn-out drumbeat in a suspense film. Karen, protecting the neighborhood doesn't mean breaking the law, and it certainly doesn't mean humiliating yourself in front of everyone. You're not a hero. You're entertaining. Her jaw dropped. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The entire street had witnessed her meltdown, every dramatic gesture, every frantic step, every failed attempt to assert authority. She had gone from HOA queen to neighborhood cautionary tale in the span of a few short minutes. And then she froze. Her hands trembled, the papers slipping from her grasp and fluttering to the ground like fallen leaves. She looked around helplessly, finally aware that she had no escape, no backup plan, and no audience that wasn't already quietly judging her. The younger officer finally let out a chuckle, quickly covering his mouth. The older officer shook his head slowly, muttering something about HOA drama reaching peak absurdity. Karen's face paled, her shoulders slumping as the weight of humiliation settled over her. I leaned against my car, keeping the badge visible, letting the tension linger. Take a deep breath, Karen, I said gently. Tonight, you learned the hard way that authority has limits. Sometimes it comes not from keys or bylaws, but from knowing the law and who enforces it. She took a shaky breath, her defeat palpable. The neighborhood remained silent for a moment, absorbing the spectacle. Then from somewhere down the street, someone muttered, "Next time, just ring the doorbell." Laughter rippled through the crowd, soft at first, then louder, leaving Karen with no dignity to reclaim. I smiled. Justice, after all, doesn't always arrive quietly. Sometimes it comes with drama, suspense, and a neighborhood audience that can't look away. Just when I thought Karen had been thoroughly humbled, she proved once again that desperation has no limits. She retreated a few steps, muttering to herself, her fingers drumming nervously on her HOA paperwork. The neighborhood, still buzzing from the earlier drama, held its collective breath. Windows peeked open, phones hovered, and even the officers were leaning forward slightly, anticipating the next act. Karen's eyes flicked toward her car, then the HOA bulletin board, and finally back at me. I could feel her plotting, the gears in her head spinning faster than I'd ever seen. She whispered something under her breath that sounded like a plan, half delusional, half ridiculous, but the tension was real. "I'm not done yet," she announced aloud, almost to herself. This isn't over. I have rules, I have evidence." Her voice quivered, but there was determination there, the kind only true HOA warriors possess when their ego is on the line. I stepped closer, deliberately calm, my badge catching the late afternoon sun. "Karen, this is your final chance to stop. You've already called 911 on me, humiliated yourself, and entertained the entire neighborhood. Think carefully before your next move." But Karen, fueled by pride and panic, ignored the warning. She rushed back toward the HOA bulletin board, waving the papers like a banner of rebellion. "I'm posting my complaint. Everyone will see. This is illegal. It's harassment," she shouted. I stayed put, arms crossed, letting her energy exhaust itself. The younger officer tried to hide a grin, and the older one leaned on his car, clearly enjoying the theater unfolding in front of them. The street had gone completely silent, neighbors holding their breath, sensing a climax was approaching. Karen's movements grew frantic. She tried to staple her complaint to the board, but the papers slipped from her hands. She bent down, muttering curses under her breath as she scrambled to pick them up. The scene was almost slapstick, like watching a drama collide with a comedy, but the tension was still palpable. "You know, Karen," I said, taking a step closer, my voice calm but authoritative, "you really don't want to do this. Every person here is watching, every phone is recording. and every step you take toward the board right now is only making things worse." She froze mid-motion, one hand hovering over the papers, her lips trembling. I could see her thinking, if I post this, maybe people will see it my way, maybe I can regain some control, maybe. But reality and the entire neighborhood had other plans. A neighbor from across the street couldn't hold back and muttered, "Is she really trying to fight the sheriff?" Laughter rippled quietly through the crowd, and Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. The officers exchanged glances, shaking their heads, both trying not to burst out laughing. Karen's next move was impulsive. She slammed her hands on the bulletin board, trying to attach the papers by sheer force. The staples bent, the papers fell again, and a dramatic gust of wind carried a few right into the street. Her face twisted in frustration and disbelief. I took a deep breath, letting the suspense stretch. "Karen, this is your final warning. Step back, breathe, and accept the facts. The sheriff is in charge here, the neighborhood witnessed everything, and you are officially out of options." Her eyes darted around, calculating, plotting, hoping for some miraculous loophole. But the reality was inescapable. She had exhausted every avenue, 911, the HOA, threats, dramatics, and yet nothing worked. She was outmatched, outclassed, and completely exposed. Finally, she sank to the curb, clutching what remained of her complaint papers. Her shoulders slumped and her head dropped. The street remained silent, the tension broken only by soft snickers from the neighbors. Karen had reached the peak of her drama, and there was nowhere left for her to go. I stepped closer, keeping my badge visible, my voice calm but firm. "Karen, authority isn't about keys, papers, or shouting. It's about understanding limits, respecting laws, and, most importantly, knowing who's really in charge." Her shoulders shook as she muttered, I guess I learned my lesson." And just like that, the curtain fell on her final desperate scheme. The neighborhood exhaled collectively. Phones slowly lowered. Windows closed. The officers finally relaxed, shaking their heads with quiet amusement. I leaned on my car, the badge glinting in the fading sunlight. Justice had been delivered, not with anger, not with threats, but with patience, authority, and a little bit of humor. Karen's final desperate act had fizzled spectacularly, leaving her defeated, the neighborhood entertained, and me, finally ready to reclaim a quiet evening in my own driveway. Karen sat on the curb, her shoulders slumped, her once proud master key lying discarded at her feet. The street was quiet now, save for the occasional whisper of a neighbor remarking on what they had just witnessed. Phones were slowly lowering, and a few people were even laughing quietly behind their hands. The drama had reached its peak, and everyone knew it. I leaned against my car, keeping my badge visible, letting the weight of authority and a little humor sink in. "Karen," I said calmly, "sometimes in life the best way to assert authority isn't through keys, complaints, or panic calls. It's through knowing the law and respecting boundaries. That's it." Her lips quivered as she muttered, I didn't mean for it to get this bad." I shook my head gently, a soft smile on my face. "I know, Karen, and I get it, you just wanted to protect the neighborhood. But when your actions create chaos, when you call 911 on your sheriff, and when you humiliate yourself in front of everyone, that's not protection. That's entertainment." She blinked, finally taking in the scene around her. Neighbors peered from behind windows, some still whispering, some quietly snickering. Even the officers, now relaxed, leaned against their vehicles, smiling at the absurdity. Karen's gaze fell to her hands, clutching the failed HOA papers. For the first time, she seemed genuinely reflective. The fire and drama were gone, replaced by that slow dawning of comprehension. She had been completely outmaneuvered by someone she never even realized was in her own neighborhood. One neighbor, unable to resist, called out from across the street, "Hey, Karen, maybe next time just ask for the car key politely." A ripple of laughter spread, and Karen's cheeks turned bright red. She buried her face in her hands, muttering something inaudible but full of mortified defeat. I couldn't help but chuckle softly. Justice, in its quiet and patient form, was finally served. Karen had tried every trick in the HOA handbook, every dramatic gesture, and yet she had been humbled without a single harsh word, simply because the truth, the law, was on my side. I stepped closer, giving her a final piece of advice. "Listen, Karen, Take this as a lesson. Authority isn't about grand gestures, it's about knowledge and patience. Misusing power only makes you a story for everyone else. And trust me, the neighborhood will remember this one for a long time. Her shoulders shook slightly, but there was no argument, no last-minute ploy. The fight had left her, like a balloon that had deflated, leaving only the lingering embarrassment. I could see it in her eyes, the begrudging acknowledgement that the sheriff always wins, and sometimes humility is the only way forward. The officers finally started to walk back to their cars, giving a small nod of approval. "Well, that was a first," muttered the younger one, still grinning. The older officer chuckled, shaking his head slowly. "You've got one for the books, ma'am," he said to Karen before climbing into the patrol car. I waved politely as they drove off, leaving Karen to sit in stunned silence. For a moment, there was only the soft rustling of papers and the distant laughter of neighbors. The street had returned to its quiet, suburban calm, but the memory of the evening would linger, long after Karen finally picked herself up and retreated. I finally walked back to my car, slipping into the driver's seat. My badge glinted in the fading light, a reminder of the quiet authority that had prevailed. As I started the engine, I glanced at Karen one last time. She was slowly gathering her papers, defeated but alive, an important distinction in her chaotic little saga. And as I drove away, the sun setting behind the neighborhood, I reflected on the lesson of the day. Sometimes the biggest drama comes from the smallest assumptions. Sometimes a master key isn't magic. And sometimes the sheriff is always watching. The neighborhood would talk about this day for weeks, maybe months. Every whispered story, every shared video, every chuckle would carry the same lesson. Never underestimate your neighbor, especially when your neighbor happens to be the sheriff. And as for Karen, well, she learned the hard way that sometimes the law and a little humor trumps every master key in the world. The driveway was quiet again. Peace had returned. Justice had been served. And I finally could enjoy the simple satisfaction of knowing the neighborhood was safe and slightly more entertained than they had expected. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.